Hello everyone, welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we are reviewing round 17 of the 2023 season where we were at the Suzuka International Racing Course for the 2023 Japanese Grand Prix. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel, Hit the Apex the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. It was the normal weekend of practice 1, practice 2, practice 3, qualifying and the race. And of course, we will start on Friday in practice 1, where Verstappen comfortably headed Sainz and Norris in the opening practice session in Japan. Max Verstappen and Red Bull returned to their pace-setting form in the opening hour of running in Japan as the Dutch drivers set the early pace in the first practice session to comfortably lead rivals Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Just 5 days on from an action-packed evening in Singapore, the drivers made their way to Japan for the second race of the double header. But as opposed to Singapore, where it was hot and humid, they were greeted by slightly cooler conditions in Suzuka. As the lights turned green to kick off the weekend's action, it was Verstappen who led the drivers out as Red Bull looked to hit the ground running in a bid to return to winning ways after their difficult outing in Singapore. Along with that, this session would also see the teams testing the new version of the C2 tyre ahead of next season. This meant all drivers would be handed 2 additional sets of tyres compared to the usual 13, with all teams running the prototype tyre in this session. And following the first 20 minutes of running, it was Verstappen who led the way, as his time of a 1 minute 32.442 second lap on the prototype tyre was 0.724 seconds faster than second place Fernando Alonso. We then saw a flurry of laps come in on the soft tyre, with Verstappen once again setting the time to beat his lap of 1 minute 31.647 seconds, saw him top the timesheets in first practice, with his nearest challenger Sainz 0.626 seconds off the pace. Norris left it late to go third for McLaren ahead of Leclerc, who made it 2 Ferraris in the top 4, although he was 3/10ths off his teammate Sainz. Meanwhile, home favourite Yuki Tsunoda impressed to go 5th for AlphaTauri. Alonso wound up 6th for Aston Martin ahead of Oscar Piastri, who's fresh from signing his new contract with McLaren, the Williams of Alex Albon, and the AlphaTauri of Liam Lawson. Lance Stroll was back out on track after missing the Singapore Grand Prix due to precautionary measures after his crash in qualifying, and he was 10th for Aston Martin ahead of the second Red Bull Sergio Perez, who was down in 11th. Pierre Gasly was the lead Alpine in 12th ahead of the Mercedes of George Russell, although he and his Mercedes teammate Lewis Hamilton didn't run the soft tyre, with the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg in 13th. Esteban Ocon was down in 15th in the other Alpine ahead of Hamilton, the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas, and the Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Logan Sargent was 19th for Williams, while Zhou Guan Yu brought up the rear of the field for Alfa Romeo. The drivers will now look over the data, debrief with their teams before readying themselves for the second practice session in Japan later on Friday at 3 p.m. local time. We will move to that session then, where Verstappen led Leclerc and Norris to stay on top during second practice at Suzuka. Max Verstappen and Red Bull put the memories of a challenging Singapore weekend behind them as they doubled up during Friday practice for the Japanese Grand Prix, following up their pace-setting FP1 efforts with the fastest time in FP2, which was red flagged late on when Alpine's Pierre Gasly crashed out. In another session that featured prototype C2 tyre testing for the 2024 season, Verstappen was one of the first drivers to switch to the standard soft compound rubber, producing an initial benchmark of 1 minute 31.377 seconds seconds to continue where he left off earlier in the day. Following runs from Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc at the halfway mark, which saw both briefly top the times, Verstappen rejoined the Suzuka track on softs to pump in a 1 minute 30.688 second lap and move comfortably clear of the McLaren and Ferraris. Leclerc wound up 3/10 adrift and Norris 4/10 back, with Carlos Sainz, who was the winner in Marina Bay, and pole sitter for the last two races, making it two Ferraris in the top four, half a second down on Verstappen's time. After both Mercedes drivers refrained from using the soft rubber in first practice, George Russell posted a lap time quick enough for fifth this time out, although teammate Lewis Hamilton had another quiet session on his way to 14th, having asked the team to check his floor early on. Fernando Alonso and Alex Albon led the way for their respective Aston Martin and Williams teams in 6th and 7th, followed by the other McLaren of the freshly re-signed Oscar Piastri and the second Red Bull of Sergio Perez, with Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas 10th. Lance Stroll continued to get back up to speed after his heavy qualifying crash in Singapore, which ruled him out of that race, placing 11th from Alpine driver Esteban Ocon, the Haas of Nico Hulkenberg, and the aforementioned Hamilton. A closely matched gaggle of cars followed, led by F1 newcomer Liam Lawson in 15th, with the New Zealander doing all he can to get himself in the mix for a full-time seat next season, as AlphaTauri mull over their three-way driver dilemma. Alfa Romeo Zhou Guanyu survived a wild moment at the exit of Degner 2 en route to 16th on the timing screens, followed by Haasman Kevin Magnussen, who was left frustrated by both Sainz and Lawson for getting in his way through the S-curves. Yuki Tsunoda was 18th in front of his home fans, just 0.037 seconds slower than new teammate Lawson, but 3 places back, as Gasly and Williams rookie Logan Sargent, who's fighting for his F1 future, brought up the rear. Gasly brought out the red flags in the final moments of the session when he locked up at the second Degner, slid through the gravel and thumped the barriers on the outside of the corner, the Frenchman duly apologising over the radio for the damage sustained. The drivers and teams will now study their data into the Suzuka sunset to come back in the best possible shape on Saturday, with final practice set to begin at 11:30 local time and the all-important qualifying hour at 3 p.m. We will move to practice 3 then, where Verstappen led Norris and Piastri in action-packed final practice hour in Japan. Max Verstappen made it a practice clean sweep as he topped the timesheets during the final hour of running in Japan before qualifying later today. The Dutch driver led the way ahead of the McLarens of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. After a busy first day in Suzuka, the teams returned on Saturday looking to finalise their setups ahead of qualifying, but the drivers were in no rush to get going in FP3, with only Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc out on track in the first 10 minutes. But one by one, the drivers began to file out onto the track, with most opting to run the soft tyres. And after the first 20 minutes, it was Verstappen who held the benchmark time with a lap of 1 minute 30.96 seconds to lead Norris by just 0.214 seconds. The drivers then strapped on another set of new soft tyres for a final low fuel run ahead of qualifying, and once again it was Verstappen who led the way with a time of 1 minute 30.267 seconds to again lead Norris, who wound up 0.24 seconds off the Dutch driver. Piastri showed a good turn of pace on his flying lap to go third, just 0.048 seconds off his McLaren teammate, while Sergio Perez was fourth in the other Red Bull, although he was 0.737 seconds off Verstappen's pace-setting time. To go to fourth, Perez jumped ahead of both Ferraris, with Leclerc and Sainz ending up fifth and sixth. The Mercedes pair of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell followed them, with both drivers looking more comfortable today after what Hamilton described as a tough Friday. Fernando Alonso was 9th for Aston Martin ahead of the Alfa Romeos of Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas in 10th and 11th. Kevin Magnussen was once again the lead Haas in 12th ahead of the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. Fresh from today's announcement that Yuki Tsunoda would be staying at AlphaTauri alongside Daniel Ricciardo next year, the home favourite ended the session 14th, ahead of the second Haas of Nico Hulkenberg. Logan Sargent was the lead Williams in 16th, ahead of his teammate Alex Albon in 18th, with the other AlphaTauri Liam Lawson sandwiched between the pair in 17th. Lance Stroll was 19th for Aston Martin, while Pierre Gasly, who was recovering from his session-ending crash in FP2, brought up the rear of the field for Alpine in 20th. All three practice sessions are now complete, and the drivers will now ready themselves for qualifying later today at 3 p.m. local time. We will move to qualifying then, where Verstappen and Red Bull return to form as they charge to pole ahead of the McLarens at Suzuka. Max Verstappen and his Red Bull teammate brushed off a challenging weekend in Singapore by storming to pole position for the Japanese Grand Prix, getting the better of McLaren pair Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris during Saturday's qualifying session at Suzuka. Verstappen clocked a time of 1 minute 29.012 seconds in the early minutes of Q3 and improved to a 1 minute 28.877 seconds on his second run, a dominant performance that puts him more than half a second clear of Piastri and Norris, who couldn't better their initial laps as the checkered flag dropped. Charles Leclerc pipped the other Red Buller Sergio Perez to fourth, with teammate Carlos Sainz rounding out the top six. The two Ferraris only completing one lap apiece in the pole shootout after using up more softs earlier on. Following their tricky first day of practice, Mercedes had to settle for 7th and 8th in qualifying, with 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton ahead of George Russell, who was another to be eliminated to just one attempt in Q3. Home favourite Yuki Tsunoda, fresh from being announced at AlphaTauri alongside Daniel Ricciardo for the 2024 season, put in a fine drive to 9th, with Fernando Alonso, the last of the Q3 runners, also sticking to one lap and landing 10th. F1 newcomer Liam Lawson came agonisingly close to another Q3 appearance outing, but had to settle for 11th, followed by the Alpines of Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, who was split by Alex Albon's Williams and the lead Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Alfa Romeo lost both cars at the Q1 hurdle, with Valtteri Bottas just missing the cut in 16th and Zhou Guanyu 19th. The Chinese racer having been seen running wildly wide and losing his final lap for exceeding track limits, while also reporting traffic. Lance Stroll and Nico Hulkenberg followed in the other Aston Martin and Haas machines, with Williams rookie Logan Sargent bringing up the rear behind the aforementioned Zhou after crashing out of proceedings midway through the opening phase. Sargent entered the weekend with more questions being asked about his F1 future, and having vowed to cut out mistakes, he dramatically lost control of his Williams at the final corner, took a trip through the gravel and slammed into the barriers, bringing out a red flag. There could yet be a twist in the tail before Sunday's race, however, with Leclerc, Zhou and Bottas all under investigation post-session for allegedly failing to follow the race director's instructions regarding maximum lap time. So, as it happened then in Q1, Verstappen set the pace as Sargent crashed out. With a tough Singapore weekend behind them and having topped all three practice sessions around the fast-flowing Suzuka circuit, Verstappen and Red Bull were back in their usual position of favourites heading into qualifying, but could any of their rivals land another upset? As the first phase began amid bright and warm conditions, Stroll and Lawson were quick to head out and get some early banker laps in, while the other 18 drivers bided their time and spent the opening few minutes sitting in their pit garages. With more cars trickling out on track, practice pace setter Verstappen stated his intentions from the off by pumping in a time of 1 minute 29.878 seconds, putting him a couple of attempts clear of Norris, with Piastri 4 attempts further back in third, both McLarens ahead of Perez's Red Bull. Times were coming in thick and fast when the session was red flagged due to a heavy crash for the under pressure Sargent coming out of the final corner. Replay showing him losing control, sliding through the gravel and slamming into the barriers. After marshals removed Sargent's heavily damaged car from the track, the action resumed and drivers who missed out on laps, the two Ferraris not getting to the line in time, and Hulkenberg, Gasly and Albon all having times deleted over track limits, set about getting their names on the board. Moments later, it was revealed that Leclerc, Zhou and Bottas were all being looked at for potentially failing to follow the race director's instructions regarding maximum lap time, adding another layer of jeopardy to the session. The Monegasque provisionally rising to third, with teammate Sainz going fifth. Verstappen and Norris refrained from another run in the closing stages given their strong initial efforts, remaining P1 and 2 as the checkered flag dropped, with Leclerc holding P3, Lawson impressively rising to P4, and Piastri rounding out the top 5. Sainz's time was good enough for 6th from Perez, Tsunoda and Mercedes pair Russell and Hamilton, as the sole remaining Williams of Albon jumped out the drop zone to split Alpine pair Gasly and Ocon in 12th. Alonso and Magnussen were the final drivers to reach Q2 in P14 and 15, meaning Bottas, Stroll, Hulkenberg and Zhou all dropped out, the latter losing his final lap time over track limits at Degner 2, and also complaining of traffic in the form of an AlphaTauri. Sargent was the 5th and final driver to be eliminated, having watched the rest of the session from the sidelines after his accident that leaves the Williams mechanics with plenty of work to do overnight ahead of Sunday's Grand Prix. So knocked out in Q1 was Bottas, Stroll, Hulkenberg, Zhou and Sargent. In Q2, Leclerc was in P1, but Verstappen and the McLarens saved tyres. After a short break, the qualifying action resumed and Verstappen continued where he left off with another rapid first lap of 1 minute 29.964 seconds, only marginally slower than his Q1 benchmark despite running used softs, with the McLarens close behind once again, Piastri this time ahead of Norris. With Perez 4th from Tsunoda, the two Ferraris, the two Mercedes and Lawson, the provisional drop zone featured Alonso, the Alpines, Albon and Magnussen, with Gasly reporting that he could feel something between my feet in the cockpit, he said. Verstappen, Piastri and Norris all remained in the pits and saved some soft tyres while the rest of the field pushed for improvements, bringing a new pace-setting time from Leclerc at a 1 minute 29.94 second lap as Perez rose to P3 behind his teammate. Hamilton climbed to P4 and Sainz moved up to P5. Piastri ended 6th from Tsunoda, Russell and Norris, with Alonso grabbing the final Q3 spot at the expense of Lawson, who was less than half a tenth of a second separating the pair after they completed their final laps. Joining Lawson in the drop zone were the two Alpines of Gasly and Ocon, split by the Williams of Albon in positions 12 to 14, while Magnussen rounded out the Q2 runners with a run to 15th in his Haas. So knocked out in Q2 was Lawson, Gasly, Albon, Ocon and Magnussen. And in Q3, Verstappen unleashed even more pace to take a commanding pole. It was more of the same at the start of the pole shootout as Verstappen delivered an eye-catching lap of a 1 minute 29.012 second lap to kick off Q3, some half a second clear of Piastri and Norris, followed by Perez, Hamilton and Tsunoda, with Russell, Alonso and the Ferraris running out of sync and going for just one run after using up more soft tyres. As the final laps came in, Verstappen made his already impressive P1 time even more impressive as he dipped below the 1 minute 29 second barrier and fired in a 1 minute 28.877 second lap, well and truly putting pole out of reach of the chasing McLaren pair. Despite their best efforts, Piastri and Norris couldn't improve as they crossed the line, but P2 and 3 nonetheless made a stellar return for McLaren ahead of Leclerc's Ferrari and the second Red Bull of Perez, who was almost a second slower than teammate Verstappen. Sainz, who was the pole sitter for the last two races at Monza and Marina Bay, this time rounded out the top 6 places as Mercedes made do with 7th and 8th, Hamilton getting the edge on Russell after their challenging start to the weekend. Tsunoda wound up 9th, adding to the celebrations of his contract renewal, with Alonso the slowest of the drivers to reach Q3, but at least ensuring that Aston Martin were represented in the final qualifying phase. Verstappen said after qualifying, it's been an incredible weekend so far, especially in qualifying, where you can really push it to the limit. It felt really, really nice. We had a bad weekend in Singapore. I already felt from the preparation we had this was going to be a good track, but you never really know how good it's going to be. From lap one, it's been really, really nice. Of course, you try to find little improvements here and there, and I think we did that. To be on pole here is fantastic. The 2023 Japanese Grand Prix began at 2 p.m. local time on Sunday, and we will move to the race then, where Verstappen dominated the Japanese Grand Prix as Red Bull secured back-to-back constructors titles. Max Verstappen and Red Bull returned to winning ways in Sunday's Japanese Grand Prix after surviving a dramatic first lap and pulling comfortably clear of McLaren pair Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, confirming another constructors title for the Milton Keynes team. Verstappen was attacked by Piastri and Norris at the start, but kept both of them at bay, navigated safety car and virtual safety car periods, and then romped into the distance, taking the checkered flag first for the 13th time this season. As such, Red Bull mathematically put the Constructors' Championship out of their rivals' reach to back up their 2022 win and make it 2 triumphs on the bounce, underlining the outfit's superiority under F1's latest ground effect era so far, while adding to the team's titles they achieved in 2010, 11, 12 and 13. A battle between the McLaren drivers was ultimately settled in Norris's favour, the Briton getting ahead at the start, dropping behind when Piastri pitted under a virtual safety car, but then displaying enough pace for the team to swap positions. Charles Leclerc led Ferrari's charge to 4th, completing a bold late move on Mercedes rival George Russell, the only front runner to attempt a one-stop rather than 2 around the outside of turn 1 and 2. Russell fell into the clutches of teammate Lewis Hamilton in the closing laps and was instructed to let him by, which he agreed to do. After the Mercedes drivers had gone wheel to wheel and almost collided earlier in the race, Carlos Sainz also pounced on Russell's aging tyres to take 6th behind Hamilton, with Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso and the Alpines of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, despite a first lap incident for the former scoring the final points of the day. With the cars starting 9th and 11th, AlphaTauri had been points contenders in the opening exchanges, but faded as the various strategies played out. F1 newcomer Liam Lawson beating home favourite Yuki Tsunoda to the flag in 11th and 12th. Zhou Guanyu was another to bounce back from lap 1 drama as he crossed the line in 13th, the only Alfa Romeo driver to finish after teammate Valtteri Bottas was punted into the gravel by Williams rival Logan Sargent. Haas pair Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen were the final finishers in P14 and 15, a theme of their 2023 season amid tyre degradation struggles, with a gaggle of cars behind retiring at different stages. Williams suffered a double DNF as Sargent returned his car to the garage after clashing with Bottas, having been penalised pre-race and given a pit lane start for major car changes following his qualifying crash, while Albon retired with damage after his own lap 1 incident involving the Alfa Romeo. Another bottleneck moment at the start saw Red Bull Sergio Perez bang wheels with Hamilton before a separate incident with Magnussen forced him to pit for a second new front wing, leading to his retirement, albeit reappearing late on to serve time penalties. Lance Stroll was the other driver to retire with a rear wing issue on his Aston Martin. So, as it happened then, after an action-packed qualifying hour in which Verstappen and Red Bull bounced back to their best, significant repair work at the other end of the order saw Sargent sent from P20 to the pit lane and handed a 10-second penalty, with Williams building up what the stewards determined to be a new car and more than the 2 permitted per event, thanks to his Q1 crash. As the hot conditions ramped up in the hours before the start, there was plenty of focus on race strategy and the tyre compounds each driver would choose from their opening stints, with F1 supplier Pirelli predicting at least 2 stop approaches to be used amid the high degradation and high temperatures experienced over the weekend. When the drivers lined up on the grid and the tyre blankets came off, it was revealed that the front runners and majority of the field would be staying on mediums, with Tsunoda, Alonso, Lawson, Bottas, Stroll, Hulkenberg and Zhou going for softs. As the lights went out, pole sitter Verstappen immediately came under attack from Piastri on the inside and Norris on the outside during a particularly close run down to turn 1, but the reigning double world champion did just enough to keep his advantage. With Piastri boxed in, Norris took advantage to jump his teammate and briefly run alongside Verstappen, while drama ensued behind as Perez jinked to the left to avoid signs, made contact with Hamilton and sent the 7-time world champion onto the grass. Another chain reaction towards the back of the pack involving Ocon, Zhou, Bottas and Albon, who went airborne, saw all 4 drivers pit for repairs at the end of the lap, with Sargent also pitting to serve his time penalty as the safety car headed out on track to neutralise proceedings and allow marshals to retrieve debris. Perez was the next driver to visit the pit lane on lap 3, with Red Bull determining that he needed a new front wing after that early contact, but the Mexican was subsequently noted for a safety car infringement, which turned into a 5-second penalty. With the debris cleared, the safety car came in at the end of lap 4 and released Verstappen back into the clear air ahead of Norris, Piastri, Leclerc, Sainz, the fast starting Alonso, Hamilton and Russell, as Lawson and Tsunoda held the final points paying positions. There was more drama involving Sargent shortly after the restart as he ran into the back of Bottas under braking for the hairpin, prompting an angry radio message from the Finn and landing another 5-second penalty from the stewards. Bottas would retire shortly afterwards. Elsewhere, the Mercedes drivers embarked on an exciting wheel-to-wheel scrap, Russell getting ahead with a move into the chicane that brought back memories of the infamous Alain Prost-Ayrton Senna collision back in 1989, before Hamilton fought back around the outside of turn 1. Having picked off a few cars, Perez's recovery from his early stop took a turn for the worse when he locked up and tipped Magnussen into a spin at the hairpin. "I have front wing damage again," Perez exclaimed over the radio, forcing him into the pits for a second time and earning another 5-second penalty. After Alonso kicked off the first round of stops on lap 12, Piastri was the first of the front runners to pit on lap 14 and swap from mediums to hards just as the virtual safety car came out for the debris, saving him some precious time in the process, with none of his close rivals able to take advantage before it ended. With the damage picked up by his Red Bull seemingly too significant to continue, Perez was soon told to box his car and retire from the race, meaning victory for teammate Verstappen will put him in prime position to seal the world title next time out in Qatar. Verstappen pitted from the lead on lap 17, going for more mediums rather than hards to hand Norris a temporary lead and also release Leclerc, Sainz and Russell, the latter experiencing another close call with Hamilton at Spoon, where he was forced onto the runoff. "Where do we want to fight here? Each other or the others?" Russell commented. Norris pitted a lap later than Verstappen and, following the aforementioned VSC period, rejoined the track behind teammate Piastri, but the Briton proceeded to light up the timesheets and close back in on the top 2 runners. As the first pit stops and various strategies unfolded, Verstappen on the mediums remained in P1, with Russell also on the mediums up to second and the only driver yet to pit, followed by Piastri and Norris, who were both on hards, Leclerc and Sainz, who were both on mediums, and Hamilton, Ocon and Alonso, who were all on hards, as well as Tsunoda, who was on mediums. After losing places to Hamilton and Ocon, the latter rising up the order after his first lap drama and change of tyres, Alonso took to the radio to express his frustration over Aston Martin's strategy, saying, "You've thrown me to the lions by stopping that early." The Silverstone team's pain was compounded by Stroll boxing to retire his car. With Russell ploughing on in second, Norris was told that the Mercedes man could be going for a one-stop strategy, but that he's only a threat if we abuse our tyres. Russell eventually pitted on lap 25, taking on the hards and coming back out in ninth, which promptly turned into eighth with a move on Alonso. While Verstappen had built a lead of more than 10 seconds up front, Piastri and Norris were running within a few car lengths of each other in second and third, the latter taking to the radio and making clear that he was losing lap time, adding, "It's just ruining the race now." McLaren duly swapped positions along the start-finish straight on lap 27, with Verstappen now 13 seconds clear as Sargent and Albon became the latest drivers to pit their cars and retire from proceedings, landing a double blow for the Williams team. Verstappen remained in a league of his own as the race developed, while Norris gradually pulled away from Piastri. The Ferrari and Mercedes drivers ran line Aston, Russell aiming to make a one-stop work, and Gasly and Alonso, after a second stop for hard tyres, and Tsunoda completed the top 10. Shortly afterwards, a radio message to Alonso confirmed that teammate Stroll's retirement had been caused by a rear wing failure, and while there were no signs of any issues on his car, the Spaniard was asked to refrain from running over the curbs for the rest of the race. Further front running stops came on lap 35 with Leclerc and Hamilton taking on hard tyres, prompting Piastri to dive in for fresh rubber one lap later to defend from the undercut. The Australian rookie also running the white mat compound to the finish. Norris responded by pitting on lap 37, with Verstappen making his final stop on lap 38, with both drivers taking hards, as Sainz stretched out his medium tyre stint and Russell climbed into the podium positions, but faced the challenge of keeping his aging tyres competitive. Russell's deficit was soon highlighted though, with Norris blasting his way past for third, before Sainz finally pitted from second on lap 39, dropping him to seventh as rival drivers filtered through. There was a late retirement-related twist, with Red Bull sending Perez back out on track to complete a lap and then serve the time penalties he was given earlier in the race, meaning no risk of a sanction carrying over to the next round. Russell continued to drop down the order as the final laps ticked by, with Piastri and Leclerc getting passed in quick succession, both moves being initiated around the outside of the first corner, and Leclerc continuing through turn 2 to raise some eyebrows, with Russell starting to hold Hamilton up and Sainz rapidly closing in on fresher tyres. The latter took to the radio to comment that we're going to lose both of these positions, prompting Mercedes to swap their two cars into turn 1 on lap 49. Russell asked if Hamilton could provide DRS to aid his defence against Sainz, which was duly granted, but Sainz nevertheless found a way through and then joked that they're using my trick against me after his tactics in Singapore. As the final laps ticked by, Verstappen eased his way to the flag to finish almost 20 seconds clear of Norris, with Piastri some 17 seconds further back as his pace faded, but not enough to lose a maiden F1 podium result. Positions 4 to 7 went to the Ferrari and Mercedes machines of Leclerc, Hamilton, Sainz and Russell, with Alonso following his earlier complaints picking up some more points in 8th, and Ocon and Gasly giving Alpine a double points finish, having swapped places on the final lap amid different strategies. Lawson and Tsunoda were unable to convert their qualifying pace into points, having to settle for 11th and 12th, with Joe Hulkenberg and Magnussen, the final drivers to cross the line and record a finish at the end of an attrition-filled race. Indeed, 5 drivers watched from the sidelines as the action came to an end, with Williams losing both Albon and Sargent amid their respective collisions, and Aston Martin losing Stroll due to that aforementioned rear wing problem. Perez, whose messy afternoon involved multiple front wing changes and penalties, at least briefly made it back out on track to cancel out those sanctions before the Qatar Grand Prix, while Bottas was the other DNF after his incidents with the Williams pair. Despite Perez's retirement, Red Bull embarked on wild and emotional celebrations in the Suzuka pit lane, with Verstappen's victory and the points that came with it enough to earn the team their 6th Constructors' Championship. Verstappen said after the race, "It's an unbelievable weekend. To win here was great. I think the car was working really well on every compound, but of course the most important was also to win the Constructors. So I'm very proud of everyone working at the track, but also back at the factory. We're having an incredible year." The next stop on the 2023 F1 calendar will be Lusail for the Qatar Grand Prix, which takes place between the 6th and 8th of October. So that is it for this video then. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel. Hit the Apex, the F1 channel. And at MCFC Hips on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. And we'll speak to you all soon. Take care.